Good afternoon or good morning or evening, depending on where you all are at. My name is Chizi Igwe. I am the co-chair for our SID-W's Young Professional Network, as well as a recent member on our board of directors. On behalf of SID, we'd like to welcome you all to today's session. It's a pleasure to see you here. This is SID's first year holding our annual conference virtually, and we know that for many of us, Zoom fatigue is very real. So we appreciate that you still took the time out of your day to hop on Zoom with us. We have a great lineup of speakers for you all, talking about a very important topic in our sector, the pipeline for diversity, equity, inclusion in terms of talent. So I'd like to briefly introduce our moderator and our speakers, and then I'll turn it over for the action to begin. So we have Yvette Burton. She is the CEO of Silent Partner Solutions and faculty at New York University. We're also joined by Tonija Hope. She is at the Ralph Bunche Center at Howard University. We also have Carmen Mezzera. So she is from the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. That's a long name there, also known as APSIA. And then we have Uzra Zeya. So she is the CEO of the Alliance for Peacebuilding. So I'd like to also send a warm thanks on behalf of SID to you all for joining us. And I will turn it over to Yvette to get us started.
Thank you so much and welcome. Congratulations for investing in your professional development. Today is going to be a real treat and we invite you to be engaged. As you probably know, we have a few polls, so we're going to make sure that your voice is in the room. But let me set the stage as to why this is such an important time in our sector and for individuals that are advancing their careers or looking to make a pivot. And I love the data. The numbers don't lie. So I know that it goes without saying that, COVID has had unpredictable and disproportionate amount of impact on our lives, especially for underrepresented communities and people, the racial unrest and that here in the States and the civil unrest in this country is not invisible on global landscapes. There's a lot of focus and increased understanding that the incidents with George Floyd and here in the US has serious implications and resonates and potentially can compromise our very important foreign policy missions abroad. It's not a black and white world, and that presents more textured, more interest, and more investment in understanding how collaboratively and in community we partner for a common purpose of peace and security. And America has been more aware, a little more, not ideally aware or equally aware as to what the issues are abroad and how they impact our safety at home. But again, there's a growing American understanding that we are globally interconnected and that we have a responsibility on the global stage as leaders of the free world. And that's a message that is resonating with people all over the world. So topics like Black Lives Matter resonating in Asia and an awareness that the principles and values that surround our commitment to equality, to diversity and inclusion is like an algorithm. It's a set of principles that serve as a North Star for communities around the world. And although COVID has us connecting in virtual forms when we really appreciate the opportunity to be more closer to each other, it's also introduced technologies in very interesting ways of how we connect, how we collaborate, how we build communities, and to provide opportunities for engagements in ways that we never expected and that are bearing fruit in getting our people, purpose, profit, and planet objectives moving in the right direction. So it's a really exciting time to be thinking about what the landscapes hold in the area of international development, international affairs, foreign policy, and how you might think about it as a very enriching and differentiating career. I in my professional life, I have come to appreciate that there's so much, and even with technology, much more so. There's lots of information, lots of pearls of wisdom when it comes to charting out your own career. And I have found personally, growing up in New York City and traveling, going from the Bronx to Brazil, that it's great to have a lot of pearls, but the key is stringing these pearls in the way that uniquely fits you. And you will see in our conversation with our panel, and I do encourage you to ask them information as soon as they come to you. Don't feel as though you have to keep them to the end. That is vital, is that, for sustainable, for you to bring your authentic self, to fulfill your purpose, really focus on taking these nuggets and applying them in a way that works for you and your goals. So before we start, I referenced those polls we had earlier, and people may be joining us as students coming out of school, people not in the industry that are pivoting and thinking about what foreign policy opportunities are and how do they transition. Or you may be already in foreign policy or international development and looking to advance your career in a way that's relevant and continues to fill your purpose. So let's go to our first poll. The first poll is, what brings you here today? You had your choice of sessions that you could attend, and certainly things you could have been doing with your morning, but you're here. So how did you discover this? Or did you discover it through your program? Did a mentor encourage you to attend? Or is it really more about the growing drumbeat of importance of this space to our broader security, so and safety at home? So if you would just give us an idea of where you are, and that's going to be really helpful for our presenters to meet you where you are. So that's our first poll. Second poll, where are you in your career exploration? Are you in school? Again, are you in another industry looking to pivot? And are you already in foreign policy, but looking to chart out a path to advance? So if you would share with us where you are, so we now get a picture of not only where you're coming from, but where you're thinking about going. Thank you so much. We have a lot of diverse perspectives in the room already, and so even more important that you bring your questions forward. And our last poll is, what do you want to leave with? As I said earlier, there's lots of gems out there, and we don't want you to be starving for information in a sea of data. So help us understand what you want to leave here today with. Is it connections to helpful resources? Is it a plan to advance to the next steps in your career? Or are you looking for practical tips and/or tools for how you can foster a more inclusive culture at work, and of course, resulting in a deeper, broader, stronger, diverse pipeline in your workplace or in your field? So if you would share that, that would be great. And again, we have diverse perspectives and experiences, and we'll try to touch 360 on all of those. And if we don't, keep us honest and keep the questions coming. So without further ado, you've already heard about our panelists. Their experiences are broad and their perspectives are unique. And so I encourage you to look them up on LinkedIn, reference your materials, but to really understand the context from that they come from, because their paths and their points of view may have been shaped in very unpredictable ways. And so with that, I would like to invite the panel to join me. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Welcome. So I want to start with a question. The question being, and Tonija, maybe we'll start with you. If you think about your purpose and how that's guided you along your career, tell us, or could you share a little bit about how you move through your career, stay true to your purpose, and how that's reflected in your work today?
Sure. Thanks again for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I actually came to this career from a very non-traditional path. I spent, during college, I majored in Latin American studies and Spanish literature in undergrad. I have a master's from GW, but I went into the restaurant business, which I started while I was in college. And I worked for Jose Andres, who I'm pretty sure by now everybody knows. I worked for Jose Andres for 12 years, starting at the front of the house and ending as a manager for one of his restaurants in Bethesda, Maryland. And in the restaurant business, I, gained a lot of skills, among them customer service, etc. But I was not comfortable. I did not know exactly how to articulate the skills that I had learned in the restaurant business into the field of international education, which is where I wanted to go. And so I had to think about that and speak to people and talk to people who were in the field who helped me realize what the skills that I had learned in the restaurant business were that were applicable to this field. And that was really helpful. Fortunately, Jose Andres and that whole team really did allow me to explore all parts of the things that I was interested from the restaurant business. We would do themed dinners around Latin American literature and so forth. And so they let me do things like that, but it was not as fulfilling as I would have liked it to be, which is very interesting now, given all of the things that he's doing in the world. At the time, I wanted to be more impactful in the world, and that wasn't being accomplished working in a restaurant. So I kind of put the word out on the street that I was interested in making a shift and joined Phelps-Stokes Fund, which administered the State Department's International Visitor Leadership Program. And I stayed there for 6 years doing several different things, but all with a focus of facilitating international exchange, whether it was among mid-career professionals through the IVLP, or if it was through connecting students at HBCUs with people in international affairs field, which we did through our Ralph Bunche societies that we created as part of Phelps-Stokes. From there, I went on to kind of craft and put together our work in Latin America, and then the opportunity to come to Howard University to the Ralph Bunche Center, International Affairs Center, came up, and it was a great opportunity to focus on my interest in international education and exchange from a higher education place that allowed me to also reach back into the K-12 space, which was a space that I was really particularly interested in and where I thought had the most impact. But from higher ed, I get to work in higher ed and through the pipeline moving forward. So I have found my place and the purpose, but it was an evolution that took some time to figure out and get to where I am, and I could not be happier. You're muted, Yvette.
Thank you. I was saying I could tell by the energy on your face and that it was an authentic journey and not linear, certainly. Gosh, Uzra, what about you? In your, did you have that experience of your purpose being what fueled you? Were there times when there was a gap between what you were doing and what you wanted to do?
Oh, such a great question, Yvette. And I just love Tonija's story, and I'm a huge fan of Jose Andres as well. So even more impressed. I'd say my journey was really shaped by my upbringing. It started in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where I was born. I was the first member of my family born in the United States. My parents immigrated to the US from India in the 1960s. So I'd say like 2 points. I was very used to being an outlier from a young age. You know, at that point in time, I didn't know it, but my parents were really part of the first wave of a South Asian migration to the United States, a diaspora community. So growing up, you know, very fond memories of being one of a handful of South Asian families, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Sri Lankan origin, who would get together. I also grew up in a bilingual household where my parents were Urdu speakers. And much to my regret, ever since I was a little kid, I would respond back in English. So I have a comprehension, but not a fluency. And I think those two experiences, you know, in this small university town in North Carolina, really from a young age, just put my interest in what was happening in the big world out there. So I jumped at the chance in elementary school to take Spanish. I took Spanish from 3rd grade, and it's one of the things we talked about as a group before today. I think those early opportunities to expose kids to a foreign language can, again, just sort of unlock a door. And I then found myself driven by this purpose to want to discover the world, but also this very idealistic goal of helping bridge differences through language, but also through the experience of studying abroad. I went to Georgetown undergrad, so I've lived in and out of the DC area, gosh, for the last 35 years. But I had a life-changing experience and opportunity to study abroad my junior year. You know, up until that point, I had never lived overseas. You know, I had never, only once, you know, been on a plane trip overseas. And I lived in Egypt as a 19-year-old for a year in the late 1980s. And that was just a life-changing experience, because I find that, you know, that experience of growing up and being an outlier, it was the experience abroad that really brought home to me what it meant to me to be an American and to represent America as an international student, a teenager, where you don't have to be associated with the US Embassy or have a big job. You know, when you're an American abroad, you represent your country. And that lit a spark where I wanted to have the opportunity to do that over the long term. And I joined the State Department 1 year out of undergrad and had a very long and rewarding career over 25 years. I spent 19 years in the field. I worked in India, Egypt, Syria, Oman, Jamaica, France. It had its ups and downs for sure, but that purpose, you know, this idealistic goal of building a more just and peaceful world, of bridging differences, that's what carried me. And that's what actually carried me to my current role, leading the Alliance for Peacebuilding. We are a global network of 130 non-governmental and private sector organizations working to sustain peace and end violent conflict. And I think I found too that it isn't just the job of government over my career to fulfill those ideals, and often government, as you pointed out, Yvette, its actions are in total contradiction of those goals. So you really need all players on the field, non-governmental organizations, civil society, universities, the private sector, and government to try to work together to seemingly achieve the impossible. So that's why I'm just thrilled to be with you.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's striking and apparent that although you didn't know how you were going to get there, you knew what you wanted, kind of viscerally. And thank you for sharing that. And Carmen, as I was listening to all the stories and thinking about your background, we would call in the private sector, you're a turnaround specialist. You know how to get people from current to the future state. How in a sector that's not necessarily known as turning around things and changing things on a dime, how did your purpose play out for you and result in where you winded up as a specialist in this area?
I love that it comes across that way, Yvette, and I'm going to blatantly steal that as marketing when I move to make my next pitch. In some ways, I think because I've worked in a number of different areas, it looks like, and I've worked with a lot of organizations in transition, it might look that way. But I think the common thread there, as Tonija and Uzra have both mentioned, is about helping people see that their choices and their decisions in their life in one place is absolutely related to people's choices and the impact and the decisions people make somewhere else. And seeing that relationship and seeing that connectivity is one of those common threads of my career, at least, and part of what really interested me to bring me into the field of international affairs as a young person. So I sort of grew up in many ways in the 180 degrees from where Uzra was. In my small town outside of Pittsburgh, nobody left, and nobody ever thought that you wanted to. Why would you ever want to leave here? So when I left to come to school in DC, which was 4 hours away, to most people in my town, that was the other side of the universe. And so when I started to travel, and when I, even from a young age, was interested in the world, people thought I was absolutely out of my mind. What do you want to bother with those people for? And for me, it was because those people have an absolute impact on my life, and my life has an absolute impact on theirs. And I think that's a common theme in my career, whether it's working with young leaders at the Atlantic Council, trying to cultivate a sense of community, particularly in the transatlantic space, and how we're all connected by shared experiences or shared values. You'll see it in my career when I was at the Fair Trade Federation, trying to activate people to understand that the choice they make by choosing this product instead of that one has a ripple effect no matter which one they choose, but they can use that power to really help particularly marginalized people, particularly women, artisans, farmers, have a better life simply by drinking this coffee instead of that, or this jewelry instead of that jewelry. And you see it now in my time at APSIA, helping young professionals and mid-career professionals see how their professional life can fit into the international affairs space, how the education that they seek, the things they seek to master, can contribute to all of this positive transformation in all of the different fields of international affairs, whether it's peace building, international education, diplomacy, business, trade, science, technology. We're blessed and cursed by having a little bit of everything in there, but all of it really is related to understanding the interrelationship that you talked about in the introduction, Yvette, and how even if you think of yourself that way, like the folks I grew up with did, you're just simply incorrect. What happens in the world impacts you on a regular basis. So really trying to stir those connections together. And I think for this space, as it might try to reconceive of the things that it's done, reevaluating where those connections are broken, perhaps, or perhaps strained, might be one good way to reconceive of the things that it's always done and stay true to the mission, but perhaps shift to be more inclusive in all of its definitions, whether it's the US staff that you hire, the local staff that you hire, the partners that you have, and all of those pieces within the chain.
Well, so if the corporate term was turnaround, the scholastic term would be systems thinker. So I love that, stringing the pearls, and I got that metaphor from being in organizations predominantly male dominated and looking at and suffering through sports metaphors. So the notion that there's gems all over, but you have to string the pearls and systems thinking is part and parcel of that. As I'm looking at the types of questions that are coming in, one of the questions that is overwhelmingly something that the participants would like to know more of is, if you would, all of you, share a little bit about your perspective as leaders. You've been the stewards of creating cultures, diverse, inclusive cultures. You know the attitudes and behaviors that do and don't result in the type of environment that produces happy, healthy, productive, and successful leaders. So, you know, I guess I'll start with, you know, Uzra, if you would. From your experience, either managing talent through cultures or creating one as a leader, could you share a little bit about what you found to be successful or not?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, my own experience in management positions, you know, particularly in government, but I think it applies in the nonprofit sector as well, is, you know, you're continually just striving, you know, sort of a prisoner of the urgent, you know, erupting crises, you know, maintaining your financial health, you know, moving on to that next goal or target. But I think it's critical that all of us as managers recognize, you know, the cohesion, the composition, the diversity of the teams involved as equally urgent, and that you don't allow those kinds of issues to be a nice to do or something, you know, when I get time, I'll look at that. You know, I had the good fortune to be in management and leadership positions maybe for the last 12 years of my diplomatic career. And what I found successively was, despite an incredible diversity that exists within the State Department itself, you know, as you looked up the ladder and particularly looking at leadership, that diversity just ended abruptly. And, you know, I ran the Bureau of Democracy, Labor, and Human Rights at the State Department, really one of the high points of my career, you know, that great mission of advancing universal rights, including equality around the world, that I arrived there in 2012 to a bureau where the next layer of leadership, with one exception, was all male and white. There were no persons of color. And what I found is, you know, in fairness, there wasn't an intentional exclusion, but there hadn't been an effort made at recruitment and really hitting the pavement and beating the bushes and moving beyond the networks of who you know to really see this as just as important as, you know, achieving the next quarter policy objective, et cetera. So for me, I think recognizing diversity as a national security imperative is really one that we need to have that transformation occur. But I also think it extends beyond public service as well to other sectors, including my own, the nonprofit sector, where there just has to be, I think, a reckoning on that, both because it's the right thing to do and it's, of course, the smart thing to do, Yvette, as you pointed out so well in your presentation.
Thank you so much. Tonija, as I think about culture, you sit at the intersection of so many different lenses that that you have to account for as a litmus test when you're thinking about, is this an inclusive culture? So if you focus on one dimension of affinity or identity for one person, it doesn't mean that you've done a thorough job in including them as a whole person. And from your experience and leadership, what do successful leaders do in that space? How do they drive inclusive and diverse cultures in the workplace or at work? Oh, I think you're on.
Oh,
there. Thank
this
you.
for me. How do leaders? Can you repeat it one more time?
Oh, sir, how, is there something, what do you see is something that effective leaders do to really look at multicultural cultures holistically and not, aligned to one affinity? You're not just a woman, you're not just a person of color. Any common threads of what effectiveness looks like?
I think that I think leaders just generally should, well, for me personally, our center is very small, and I manage in my immediate team 3 other people. But we're also a center that's based at a historically Black university. And for a lot of people, when they think of diversity, they think of, oh, let's find, where there are a lot of people of color. HBCUs, they have those. And Howard University is a very diverse place. We do have the highest number of faculty of color, but those colors are varied. There are people from all over the world that teach at Howard and students from all over the world. My center, however, is very small. So from my perspective and where I sit, I'm surrounded by diversity on a daily basis. Well, not at home these days, but generally when we are around campus, I am surrounded by diversity. And what we get at Howard is actually, we get contacted by probably many of you in the field who are looking to diversify. And I'm sitting here listening to Uzra and just thinking how, we run the diversity programs that basically provide almost all of the diversity to the State Department. The Charles Rangel, the Thomas Pickering, and then the Donald Payne for the USAID are all administered from the Bunche Center. And so I think of diversity from the perspective of we have access to what you want and need and what you should want and what you definitely need. And so what we're trying to do is trying to provide the support, the training and the development of those young people who can respond to the needs of so many fields, because and at the Bunche Center, what we're trying to do is kind of make this much more interdisciplinary. So not just political scientists and not just language majors and not just history folks are interested in international affairs, but how do you get the business people? How do you get the engineers? In the health sciences, everyone has a role to play in international development, in international affairs, and just trying to kind of paint that picture for our students and connecting them with people who need them to help make all of these workplaces much more diverse.
Yeah, it's, when I think about, as I was listening to you, diversity of thought, whether it's your bias to a discipline or the tendency for you to have an affinity for a certain area, I'm seeing the repeated themes of just a consciousness about sitting and the value of these myriad of ecosystems. And, Carmen, I wonder, I'm sure in your role and as a leader, you've had a lot of opportunities to, in moving people from current to their future aspirations or organizations into their future state. What has your experience been about the role or the awareness of your personal button, not you as a leader personally, or maybe if you'd like to share, but we all have, as leaders, we make decisions in seconds and they're informed by biases, almost by definition of making decisions and letting them go. And when you look at building a culture or building a pipeline, hiring talent, whether it's giving somebody feedback or assessing a candidate for hire, that involves bringing yourself and your biases in on the decision. How have you seen that help or hurt establishing a multicultural and inclusive work environment?
Sure. I think the cynic in me turns back to several assumptions about people. I think people are lazy, just as a general rule, and they want to do the least amount of effort to get the most amount of impact. I think people are well-intentioned. So, but they're lazy. So they're going to call Tonija and say, here, put this around Howard. And that's kind of, they're going to feel like they checked the box. And maybe if they really want to put a slightly more effort into it, they're going to call Howard, Morehouse, Spelman, and maybe Hampton. And that's kind of where it stops. Look, I did it, box checked, hooray. So they take that well-intentioned and then it gets sucked out by the lazy. I think people also, especially in a COVID space, do what they feel comfortable with. And that's to Uzra's point. They turn to the people they know. And they turn to the places where they feel safe because they're lazy. So they channel that good intention that direction. So part of what we as leaders need to do, but partially also what we as the space need to do, is to say, your good intentions need to overcome the inertia, or to prompt you to think more complexly about what you're trying to achieve. So if what you're trying to achieve is ticking the box, here's the bare minimum for ticking the box. If the goal you're trying to achieve or the mission that you have is being better at our work, and to me, that's where the diversity elements either come for that box checking to feel better in the space because you feel guilty that George Floyd was murdered, or you see it as integral to being better at what you do. And if it's better at what you do, it doesn't live in the marketing department, it doesn't live in HR, it lives in programs, it lives in leadership, it lives in a really distinct place. So when it's framed in terms of using those good intentions to be better at your mission, you can help people overcome their laziness because they want to do their work, whether it's peace building, education, business, better. And that's where people can get really creative, and you as a leader can challenge them to say, okay, you've done the bare minimum with HBCUs, who else might be excelling in our space? So for example, any of you who are searching for GIS specialists may think, oh, who else is really focused in on GIS? Well, actually, within the native and native serving and tribal institutions, there are whole departments of GIS. But if you're doing that bare minimum and sending it to the places where, as Tonija said, like that's where like they gather, so we'll just send it there. You're not thinking creatively about how it serves your interests and your good motivations. You're just sort of doing the minimum to not be lazy about it.
Oh, it's unfortunate, but it is very real and part of the dynamics. And it's easy as women for us to interpret or to attribute that to our value, our energy, and so that's really important to hold in our consciousness. Another popular question that we're getting is, gets to the fact that when you look at the diversity of the leadership and the leadership pipeline, there's not a lot of women that are represented. And so, there's a fair amount of participants, especially women's with us today, that would like to hear our experiences that of being in these predominantly male, sometimes oppressive, sometimes someone used the word machismo cultures, and how do we do goodness without running into things that are not good for our purposes of advancing broader goals and objectives. So, Uzra, do you want to? Would you mind answering that first and sharing, what you've seen and how you've navigated that?
Sure. No, it's a real passionate topic for me, and I think that with respect to women in the State Department, for example, I came into the State Department in 1990 into a class of entry-level class that was gender balanced, and that was itself a big leap forward. It was the result of litigation, the class action suit that had been filed against the State Department by very brave employee, Allison Palmer, who launched a series of legal actions to call out and ultimately dismantle what were barriers to entry for both women and persons of color. But what's interesting is looking now 30 years later, State Department, despite a lot of well-intentioned efforts, programs, et cetera, aimed at, building out a more diverse pipeline at the senior levels, it is senior foreign service 90% white, and it is over 2/3 male. So, that 50-50 when I came in was not reflected at the point of departure for, let's say, top level leadership positions, which is the senior foreign services, where all ambassadors, career, and senior officials are drawn. And I think this gets to the earlier point about true cultures of inclusion. I think there's been a narrow focus on intake at the State Department without enough of a look at what is occurring on that path that causes so many women and so few persons of color to make it through that gauntlet, whether it is utter lack of provision of childcare at the critical phase. I don't know about any of you, but I mean, for me, the toughest portion of my professional career was that 5 years before both my children went to school in trying to figure out how in the world was I going to maintain that balancing act. But also, I think, I think as women, I think as leaders, we also have to recognize our own unconscious biases. I will give a stomper shout out to Carmen's point on the laziness, really just getting beyond who you know. And, particularly in the State Department, there is a written evaluation process, and then there is something called corridor reputation, and it is literally that. It's sort of, what do people think about you? What do you hear about people? But, the people that you don't know, who aren't known, who don't have that opportunity, let's say, to get a high profile job on the 7th floor of the State Department, their incredible talent and potential may go wholly unrecognized by a system that ultimately creates self-perpetuating networks. So for me, I think the first step is for all of us, to recognize that and to make a just absolutely solid commitment to overcome that and not to fall into those traps or that laziness or the expediency that really keeps us from making progress.
That's really good observation and advice. Tonija, when I'm looking at some of the comments that are in this space of gender dynamics and inequality, someone called out machismo. What has your experience been personally and also observationally around the notion of, or the existence of machismo and what that means for women advancing objectives, work-related objectives in their careers or in the workplace?
I definitely have run up against it, both at Howard and prior to Howard, working in Latin America was definitely something I had to learn to navigate. And I will just say to some of the things that Uzra was saying, 2 things that I wanted to say. One was about study abroad and the gender breakdown of study abroad. So study abroad is by far much more participation by women in study abroad than men, like off the charts. And it's always fascinating to me to think, because I think of study abroad as a stepping stone, much like Uzra's story about how it impacted her. It impacts so many of us, women in particular, because we're the ones who participate in it more regularly. And yet that does not translate into the jobs that we should be better able to get as a result of having had that very important and impactful transformative experience. So that is one thing that I want to mention. Of course, now I can't remember the other thing, but I'll come back to it because I'm sure that it will pop into my head again. But machismo, I definitely have experienced it. And see, I knew it was going to come back to me. Associations. Having worked in Latin America and also here, one of the things that I have found to be very, very helpful is kind of a gathering of women. So I reach out to my female friends in a variety of fields, and I'll have different pockets of them. You know, sometimes it'll be the international education space or study abroad, and sometimes it'll be a broader kind of international affairs. And I have found over the years, women run things. Like, they might not have the titles like of the highest levels, but we are running the things. We are running everything. And we have the networks and the knowledge of who actually does the work, as opposed to who has the title that says they can maybe do the work. And so keeping those women around and staying in touch and communication and sharing. And some of them are very informal associations, but some of them are a little bit more formal. And I've seen in Latin America, I think the US has done this well. When we see, you know, the birth of sororities in the US, particularly Black women's sororities and so forth. Those types of associations, I think, have been very, very, very important in the United States. And I think that idea of kind of organizing more formally it happens in other parts of the world, but I don't think it has happened much, you know, to the level that it has happened here. And so that's something that I talk about when I'm, you know, abroad. When people ask that question, you know, I remember I had that question come up in Colombia in leadership seminar, and just organizing, you know, Afro-Colombians organizing, women organizing around different fields and different sectors to stay connected and help lift each other up. And I think that has been something, particularly for people of color in this country, the organization and the association with each other to help all of us lift ourselves up, I think has been very helpful, and something that we could probably do a little bit more of.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. As you were talking, it reminded me of, you know, and the broader question of women, gender, and navigating careers, especially within the US and abroad. I know for me, you know, one of the reasons why I've been a federal contractor or policy and the bulk of my corporate experience or academic experience, you know, has been global in targeted countries is because, you know, I've been married to a woman that now we've been together for 25 years. And, you know, if a company wants to put its best talent and minds around the problem at the point of need, there is no secret in that I cannot travel to the Middle East and execute an assignment without fear of execution. And so the companies that I've worked for have been very astute in not taking the options, career options, because for most companies, global assignment is you're skyrocketing. And so, you know, it's, you know, but when I travel globally as a Christian, as a woman, as a Black person, as a gay person, you know, it was all about having leaders and leadership that knew that a woman doing business, traveling alone, not just to the Middle East, but, you know, machismo, I ran up against a lot in Italy. So I really, you know, I wonder, Carmen, have you seen in your works how institutions or leaders advance and establish culture in the workplace, but are limited by their ability to mandate things across other jurisdictions, have to rely on partnering versus command and control. How do organizations and leaders attract diverse talent and yet protect their safety and security as they serve the nation?
Sure. So to tie together a little bit of what Tonija said and Uzra said, Uzra mentioned those self-perpetuating networks. And I think what's interesting about that is how that's counterpoint to what Tonija is describing, which is also a whole series of networks that don't get tapped into. So for those of you who are trying to think again about either it's pipeline building or mid-career, we work with a lot of employers who are trying to reach different audiences. So whether you're very Beltway contained and you say, dear God, is there anyone west of the Mississippi who might be interested in this stuff? We do a lot of that, or within our global framework. So there are lots of networks that you can similarly tap into and start to perpetuate those connections in the same way that a lot of the self-perpetuating engine at more established places comes about. And so once that happens, and once you've started to attract people, I think it has to live on a couple of levels. And Yvette, to your point, I think some of it has to be trusting in the quality of people that you bring in. Because when you were hired to go somewhere, you weren't hired because you were a Black woman or because you were a gay woman. You were hired because of the quality of work that you produce. And so beginning with that premise and then saying, okay, how do we build a space that is safe and effective for Yvette to deliver the quality of work that she's capable of? And some of that might be about having very difficult conversations structurally. Okay, what is our organization set up to do to protect staff of any background when they're in a place? Some of it might be having individual conversations to say, Yvette, we think you would be a great fit for this program or this project, but we understand that there are considerations that we need to navigate in a distinct way. So again, having a space that is systemic at the highest level and then individual for that staff member. And in some cases, it's okay to be a challenging force, particularly if you are protected by being, let's say, an expat who's in a region who can leave, or has in some cases, the shield of a US passport or the shield of a particular passport. And so to be comfortable being a challenging force and having the support of your organization to be there. But at the same time, it might be a case where hard decisions need to be made, and just having leadership be clear about why they're being made and who's going into that space. And I know that for some folks, especially younger folks, they may say, why aren't organizations changing faster? Why can't we just go in and blow up all of the structures in X country and make it safe for professional gay Black women to thrive? And that's where you need to be comfortable knowing that change happens slowly, but it does happen. And it particularly happens when people see win-win situations. So if you are a young person trying to change or blow up or turn a particular culture, grounding it in mission objectives, grounding it in the quality of work, grounding it in how that mix of good intentions and laziness can come together, can help move an organization forward, even if they are not as far along in their thinking as you are. So starting not with, isn't this like, shouldn't we all just, no. Our organization is trying to do X and Y, and bringing in people like this and this are going to help us do X and Y is a great way to get started. And it's true in a country context too. You want Yvette because she's going to do this and this. And so therefore you need to make it okay and safe for her to be there.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I really love again, it goes back to the purpose. I'm here too. And being true to, but being connected to a purpose broader than yourself. One of the questions that's coming up and related as we approach the top of the hour is this. The panel has been through collectively lots of elections, and although we don't know in most instances what the outcome of the election is going to be, we develop a sense of expectations about what to look for, what matters, what doesn't matter. And if you're working on behalf of the U.S. in times of transition that are very dynamic and unpredictable, as COVID has laid bare, for all of us. If you're thinking about selecting an environment, selecting a profession in an area that is dynamic, what are some things based on your experience going through these cyclical changes that you may want to, that if you were looking to enter or progress in the field, that you'd keep an eye out or ear out for? Uzra, do you want to take a shot at that one?
I mean, I think that it's really critical to be open and action oriented with respect to what you so eloquently stated at the outset, Yvette. I mean, the disproportionate impact of COVID and the degree to which it has just laid bare these inequalities, these injustices, and exclusion that ultimately I think makes it so much harder for all of us collectively, all of the organizations, individuals, experts represented on this call, to really accomplish our goals. But I think to Tonya's point and Carmen, we really need to be purposeful in tapping networks, in having tough conversations, sharing the hard truths, how, one person's experience, I mean, Yvette, what you shared in terms of, prospects for going to certain assignments where your very existence, could be in danger, that is a reality that many others may never consider, and they themselves should be part of that solution, So I see an opportunity here at this difficult moment to put on the table many, differing experiences of individuals within our fields and to really take an institutional, a collective approach to fixing them.
Thank you. Tonya, what about you? What's your perspective here?
So I got an email, and I posted that I was going to be on this panel a few weeks ago on LinkedIn, and I got an email from a colleague who used to be in the State Department, who has since left, African-American man, and the sentiment of his email was exhaustion. He said, "We have prepared so many people for positions in all kinds of places." And this is, I think he may have sent this right after the CEO of Wells Fargo said what he said, and about not being able to find people, or it was right before, right after, I can't remember. But his message to me was, we have done the work. We at Howard University, we at other HBCUs, at other minority serving institutions, etc. We have done the work, and we have prepared our students for these roles. At this point, there has to be some intentionality on the part of those making the decisions on who to hire, that this is something that they want to do. And because our people are ready. And so, I don't know, that just kind of has been, I haven't even responded. I hope he's watching. I haven't responded to his email yet, because I've just been sitting with that email like, yes, we have done the work. There are so many talented and qualified and overqualified, like, people of color, different religions, sexual orientation, you name it, and all of those things together, who are ready. And I think there has to be some level of will on the part of those who are making those hiring decisions to make that be a priority in what it is they want.
Yeah, no, amen. I know we only have 60 seconds. I can't believe how fast this has gone. This has been amazing. If you had to leave our participants with a gift of one word to serve as their North Star as they continue to explore opportunities in international development, international affairs, what would that one word be? I'm going to start with Carmen.
Perseverance, and we're here to help you endure with it.
Awesome. Love that. Uzra, what about you? What's your one word?
Audacity. I think we need to think big and be bold.
Yes, love it, love it. Okay, no one is taking mine so far, so I'm going to ask, last but not least, Tonija, what's your word?
I mean, both of those really were my sentiments, so I'll just say go.
And mine is vote. Vote. Be healthy. Be resilient. Thank you so much for lending your voices and your passion to this space. Continue to enjoy the rest of the conference and invest in your professional careers. It's been an honor facilitating and spending this moment with you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.